In the quiet shadowed town of Ravenwood lived the Billings family, and at the center of their gentle world stood Daniel Billings, his wife Mara, and their 12-year-old twins Lyle and Sophie. But the night that followed would unravel a horror so deep that an entire nation would tremble at its name. It began with a strange figure seen by neighbors lingering near the treeline behind the Billings home, a tall silhouette, unmoving, silent, almost watching, and as the wind shifted it felt as if the air itself held its breath. Later investigators would call this the first sign, the quiet whisper before the storm that would forever stain Ravenwood history. On that night Daniel returned home from his late shift unaware that danger had already seeped into the edges of his world. He sensed something was wrong. The house was too still, the lights left on, the faint hum of the refrigerator echoing through the hallway, and then he noticed the back door slightly ajar, the cold air sliding in like an omen of disaster. What Daniel did not know was that unseen eyes tracked his every step, eyes belonging to strangers who had chosen this family for reasons no one could understand, and in the darkness of those moments fate shifted its weight, preparing to strike with unimaginable cruelty. Inside the Billings home the silence grew heavier as Daniel stepped deeper into the dimly lit hallway, calling out softly for Mara and the children, but only the emptiness replied. The air carried a strange metallic scent, faint but unmistakable, and it tightened something deep inside his chest. Meanwhile, outside beyond the windows 3 figures dressed entirely in black glided across the lawn like shadows come alive, their movements precise, their steps soundless as if rehearsed 100 times before. No one in Ravenwood would ever forget the chilling description given later by a terrified witness who claimed they looked like faceless ghosts moving with purpose and hunger. These intruders had waited for hours, studying every routine, every habit of the Billings family, until the perfect moment arrived when fear could bloom with no warning and no escape. Mara had been the first to sense something wrong. Earlier that evening she heard a soft thud from the back porch, followed by the creak of wood, but when she looked nothing was there, or so she believed. She guided the twins upstairs, urging them to stay in their room until Daniel returned, unaware that eyes were already tracking her every step, mapping her movements, marking her as the next point in their twisted plan. And as Daniel reached the kitchen he felt the air shift, a presence drifting behind him, unseen but close enough for his instincts to scream. Though he tried to steady his breath, the house had already fallen into the hands of those who knew exactly how to turn an ordinary night into a living nightmare. Upstairs the twins clung to each other in the dim glow of their bedside lamp, unaware that the danger creeping through their home was already only moments away. The floorboards groaned softly beneath the weight of the intruders as they slipped inside through the open back door. Moving with a calm, unnatural confidence like predators certain of their victory, Mara stood in the hallway, frozen by a sound she could not fully recognize, a soft shuffle followed by a slow inhale that did not belong to anyone. She knew her heart thudded like a trapped bird as she stepped backward, calling for Daniel, but her voice felt swallowed by the air itself. Downstairs Daniel inched toward the living room, sensing that someone was watching him from the shadows. An icy wave crawled along his spine and he whispered a silent plea for his family to be safe, but the figures dressed in black were already dividing silently, 2 drifting toward the stairs, one lurking behind Daniel like a phantom preparing for its strike. The twins heard a faint whisper outside their door, a voice neither male nor female, low and breathless as if savoring their fear, and Sophie reached for Lyle, trembling as footsteps paused right outside the wooden frame. Mara suddenly saw the reflection of a figure behind her in the dark glass of the hallway mirror, tall, masked, unblinking, and before she could scream a gloved hand wrapped around her mouth, pulling her backward into the shadows. The house erupted into chaos as Daniel heard the muffled struggle and sprinted toward the stairs, his heart pounding with desperation. But the moment he reached the bottom step, a silhouette emerged from the darkness, raising an object that glimmered in the faint hallway light, and in that single heartbeat Daniel understood the nightmare had already begun, far beyond anything he could control or comprehend. The moment Daniel saw the glimmer of the object in the intruder's hand, time seemed to stretch into a slow, unbearable crawl. His instincts surged, urging him to protect his family, but the shadowed figure stepped forward with inhuman calm, forcing Daniel back with a silent authority that felt colder than steel. Upstairs the twins pressed their ears to the door, hearing muffled thuds and strained breaths as if the house itself was struggling to stay alive. Sophie whispered that they should hide, but Lyle shook his head, terrified that any movement might draw the intruder's attention. Mara fought desperately against the grip that held her, the masked figure dragging her down the hallway with a terrifying strength. Her fingers scraped against the wooden floor, leaving faint streaks that only deepened the sense of despair. The intruder holding Daniel seemed almost amused by his fear, tilting their heads slowly as if studying his reaction like a cruel observer in a twisted experiment. Daniel tried to speak, to plead, to distract, but the figure raised its hand signaling the others, and in an instant the house filled with a chilling coordination, the kind that revealed planning, calculation, and a motive far darker than simple violence. One intruder ascended the stairs, each step echoing like a countdown, while another dragged Mara into the guest room using nothing but brutal efficiency. The twins felt vibrations through the floor with every movement, their tiny bodies shaking as dread clamped down around them. Daniel lunged forward, desperation overriding fear, but a swift strike from the intruder sent him crashing to the floor, vision blurring, world spinning, yet his mind screamed for him to get up, to fight, to keep breathing for his family. The air grew thick with terror as the masked figures closed in, surrounding the Billings home with a presence so cold and deliberate it felt as though the walls themselves were whispering that there would be no escape and no mercy in the darkness tightening around. Daniel lay on the floor, fighting to stay conscious as the room twisted in and out of focus around him, but the sounds were unmistakable: the soft creak of the staircase, the faint terrified whimper of one of his children, the heavy deliberate footsteps of the intruders moving toward the upper level with a terrifying purpose. He forced his body to rise even as pain surged through his ribs, because every second he remained still was a second his family slipped further into danger. Upstairs the twins clutched each other's hands, trembling as the doorknob began to turn slowly, as if the intruder were savoring the moment of fear before the reveal. Lyle pulled Sophie into the small closet, pressing their backs to the wall and closing the door with agonizing quiet. They held their breath, praying that silence would disguise their presence. Down the hallway Mara struggled against her captor, her heart pounding wild with the fear that she might never see her children again. She tried to speak, but the intruder tightened their grip, forcing her deeper into the guest room where the dim lamplight cast long distorted shadows across the walls. Daniel reached the bottom of the stairs, dragging himself upward step by step, driven by the instinct to protect at any cost, but the figure at the top paused and looked down at him with a stillness that felt almost inhuman, their mask reflecting the dim light in a way that made them appear more creature than person. In that moment Daniel sensed something deeper than a simple attack. He felt the weight of intent, as though this night had been chosen with purpose, woven into a larger darkness he could not see. The house seemed to breathe with him, walls groaning, floors shivering, as if the very structure shared in the terror unfolding within. And as the intruder slowly opened the bedroom door where the twins had been moments before, a chilling silence spread through the air like a final warning that the nightmare was far from over. The intruder stepped into the bedroom and found it empty, the bed still warm, the lamp flickering as if disturbed by the breath of fear lingering in the air. A low exhale escaped the mask, not frustration but something closer to anticipation, a hunter savoring the chase. The figure drifted across the room, searching with slow deliberate movements, while the twins remained hidden in the closet, their small hearts pounding loud enough they feared the intruder could hear every beat. Sophie squeezed her brother's hand, fighting the rising panic. Lyle pressed his ear to the door, listening to the soft, almost curious footsteps circling the room below them. Daniel forced himself up the stairs, using the railing to pull his shaking body upward. Inch by inch he whispered his children's names, calling for them with nothing but raw desperation, but the intruder paused, hearing him, and turned toward the hallway. Mara, still trapped in the guest room, heard Daniel's voice and fought harder, her struggle sending muffled thuds through the walls, a plea for him to survive or escape or somehow stop the nightmare. But another figure appeared in the doorway, blocking her path, trapping her in silence and helpless terror. Daniel reached the top step and collapsed against the wall, his vision swimming as he saw the masked figure only a few paces away, their head tilting in a slow mechanical motion as if acknowledging his presence, almost greeting him. The house vibrated with tension, shadows stretching long across the floor as if they were alive, reaching toward every corner. The twins heard Daniel's voice, and for a moment hope flickered inside them, but then they heard the same footsteps approaching the closet, each step slow, intentional, and terrifyingly calm. The doorknob twitched once, twice, a slow testing motion, and the intruder leaning close as if listening for breath whispered the words "found you" in a voice so soft it felt like the last whisper of a nightmare swallowing the house whole. The closet door swung open and the intruder stared into the darkness where the twins huddled together, their small bodies shaking, yet they did not scream. Instead, they gazed back with wide, terrified eyes as if accepting that this moment was the end. But just as the figure reached forward, a sudden crash echoed from the hallway. Daniel, dragging himself upright, using nothing but the last sparks of strength left within him, hurled a heavy lamp toward the doorway. The shattering sound split the silence. Like lightning striking the heart of the house, the intruder turned sharply, stepping back with a motion that for the first time seemed startled. Daniel staggered forward, placing himself between the figure and the closet, his body trembling, his breath shallow yet his stance unbroken. Mara, hearing the chaos, tore herself free in a burst of desperate adrenaline, slamming the guest room door against the figure guarding her and sprinting toward the cries of her family. But then something unexpected happened. The three intruders halted every movement, stopping all at once as though commanded by an invisible signal. They turned toward one another, communicating through silent stillness, and in a synchronized motion they retreated, stepping back down the hallway like shadows, dissolving into deeper shadow. Daniel stood frozen, unable to understand. Mara reached the top of the stairs, gasping for her children as Sophie rushed into her arms, crying with relief and fear. But Lyle stepped out of the closet, pointing toward the hallway where the intruders had vanished, and whispered that he had heard them say something that made no sense at all. He said they whispered "not yet," as if the nightmare was unfinished, as if they had come not to end a life, but to begin something darker. And as the police later attempted to track the masked figures, they discovered no footprints, no fingerprints, no trace of entry or escape, leaving behind only the dread-filled truth that the attack on the Billings family. End of a story, but the first chapter of a terror that had chosen them for reasons no one could comprehend, and that somewhere out in the silent, cold night the intruders were still watching, waiting and preparing to return when the time was right. In the weeks that followed the attack, the Billings family tried to rebuild some fragile shape of normal life, but the house felt changed, as if every wall carried an echo of that night. Daniel checked each lock twice, sometimes 3 times, drifting through the rooms with a haunted stare, while Mara tried to hold the family together even as fear hollowed out her sleep. The twins refused to stay alone in any room, and every sound, every creak, every shifting shadow made them jump with memories that never stopped whispering. But the strangest part was the silence from the investigation. No evidence, no fibers, no footprints. It was as if the intruders were ghosts that had borrowed human form for one terrible night. The police insisted they would keep searching, but Daniel could see the doubt in their eyes, the uncertainty of chasing something they could not understand. And when night fell, the family gathered in the living room, huddled together with lights left on as if brightness could keep the darkness outside, until one night Sophie woke, suddenly, her heart racing. Without knowing why, she crept to the window, feeling a force pull her toward the cold glass, and when she looked out she saw movement by the treeline, a tall, still figure half hidden by the dark, standing exactly where the first silhouette had been seen the night everything began. She could not breathe, she could not scream, she could only stare as the figure tilted its head slowly and lifted a hand, not waving, not threatening, but signaling, as if confirming something, as if acknowledging that the story was far from finished. She backed away, trembling, whispering for her family, and when Daniel rushed to the window, nothing was there, only the rustling trees and the cold night air. Yet he felt